Hello everyone and welcome to another Ford Focus Mark 1 parts information video, episode 5 I think it is. No, 4. It's 4. I've done quite a few of these episodes in the last couple of months, and I hope that these episodes are beneficial to everybody who wants to rebuild, restore and maintain their Mark 1 Focus and have a quality and pleasurable ownership experience, because that's what it's about. That's what the Mark 1 Preservation Group was set up to do, and that's what I aim to do in these little videos, to try and make your ownership experience better by fitting the best quality of parts versus the amounts that they cost. There's always a compromise when you're buying car parts. You don't really want to get the most expensive, you want to get the cheapest, but the best cheapest. And I think that's the best way of saying it. Not cheap, because sometimes it's cheap and poor cheap, and then there's good cheap, and then there's expensive stuff. You know, it's an interesting sort of compromise there. But anyway, the first one, we're going to concentrate on brakes today. I've got several parts that I've managed to find that I thought would be relevant to a couple of different cars. So we're going to start off with this one, drum brakes. Okay, so drum brakes, if you've got a drum brake model, the drum brakes, usually they've got to an age now where the casings are a bit rusty on the outside, but that's not too much of a problem. Usually it's the faces in the inside, the actual drum surface, that gets a bit scored up with the shoes after so many years. So if you're replacing the shoes and you're doing a service at the brake of the back brakes, changing the drums is probably a good exercise to mate to the nice new shoes. I think that's a good exercise. Plus, there's one thing that a Mark 1 does have in terms of common issues, and that is the rear wheel bearings. They can give out, they will make noises, you will know about it. It's just, if you want to identify the wheel, you just got to jack the carb, spin the wheel, it will sound graunchy. The bearings are part of the drum. You can separate them out, you can get separate ones, but why would you? I mean, I bought the drums on the basis that I didn't want to be going through the faff of pressing the old ones out and putting new ones in. It's just a faff. The new bearings are built into the aftermarket drums, and these aftermarket drums are fine. I've got a pair of them on my Focus, and it's been on the car for about 5 years now. No issues, and the bearings are all good, and I think it's done about 15,000 miles in that time, or maybe 10. So far so good for that bearing and those drums. So go for aftermarket ones. They retail for probably about 80 quid for a couple of them, possibly 85 quid for 2 new drums with the bearings fitted, and you may even get a new hub nut if you buy one at a certain price, probably about £100 for them. The hub nuts, please change them. You can see one in the picture. They are from a very special laminated design. They can only be reused about 4 or 5 times. If you're not sure and you can't put, usually you'd put a paint mark in. A good garage, when they service your car, will put a paint marking next to the hub when they've torqued it up. But if you haven't got an idea of how many paint markings are, or they've been wiped off, or you're not sure, just buy new ones. Peace of mind, because I've actually seen these bearing hub nuts actually basically cross-thread themselves, and then the threads coming apart. Believe you me, you do not want that, because if that nut comes loose, you could effectively lose the wheel. The wheel would literally come off the car and pull the drum off the actual shoe assembly itself, and well, your car's going to be wrecked, put it that way. So ideal. Obviously, I've mentioned about rebuilding the back drum brakes. They are an absolute pain. Drum brakes are a pain to everybody, but you will be able to do it. It just requires a bit of patience, lots of cleaning, etc. And this is the kind of kit that you really should be looking at, because at this age, this kit comes with absolutely everything, and this is a £50 kit, and I think it's actually quite a good bargain for the amount of things you get. You get everything. You get the clips, you get the pins that locate the actual shoes to hold them against the backing plate, you get wheel cylinders. If your wheel cylinders are still not leaking, but they are the originals, change them. I don't trust them. The idea is that you can actually peel the boot back, have a look inside the boot, and if there's any element of leaking, change them. But I'd still change them, even if they were dry. If they're the originals, you need to change them. So that's an ideal task for you. And these wheel cylinders come in this kit that I've found on eBay. And ideally as well, You will need to be careful. There's 2 nuts that hold the wheel cylinders on the backside. They'll be absolutely rusty as hell. I would suggest you get a little multi-tool or Dremel, get a cutting wheel and just gently cut those bolts off and the wheel cylinder will fall out. I had to do it with my own Mark 1 because the little nuts had actually seized and rounded, and I had to cut it all off. So you will find that will be a problem, but you'll get over that, don't worry. But yeah, you've got the train arm shoe and then the leading shoe, etc. It all comes with the kit, including the springs. The springs are absolutely fine. I replaced the springs for the original ones, like for like, and it all went back together well. Just give the self-adjusters a bit of a clean. They don't work, but you can try and make them work as best as possible by cleaning it up as much as possible. The self-adjuster isn't in this picture, by the way, if you're thinking what that is. And it's just a little bar with a spring and it attaches to the shoes, and it's supposed to self-adjust the shoes. It doesn't. They get lazy, they get stuck on a little cog that's supposed to ratchet out, and you're forever having to adjust the drums every couple of years. That is normal on a Mark 1. But anyway, this is a good kit. Go for it. Now, what you might find when you've got the drum off and you've got the rebuild kit is one thing that I really would think about and inspect before you start rebuilding your back brakes, because you don't want to be in a situation where we've probably all been in this situation where we think we've ordered all the parts we need to do a job, and then we've seen something that we also need to change and we haven't got that part, and you think, great, so I'm going to have to stop here and wait a few days for this part to come. And it's this part. Now, in this picture, ignore the fact that some of you might have spotted it's not a Mark 1 drum backing plate. I couldn't find one on eBay. I couldn't find the picture. But this is actually a picture of a Mark 2 drum backing plate. But just pretend it's a Mark 1 backing plate because they're very, very similar. You can get them. I can't remember the parts number, but they are available. I couldn't find one on eBay at the moment. But it's something that I would just be aware about. The drum backing plates are made of a very thin steel. Luckily, mine cleaned up. They were a bit rusty, but mine cleaned up quite nicely. Some of them can't be though, and they start rotting through the backside. That means you need a new drum backing plate. Now, all you've got to do is you will have to detach the stub axle, which is the stub that goes through the hub. There's 4 bolts on the backside. I think they're 13 mils or maybe 15s if I'm not mistaken. And that will basically come straight out. The stub will come off, and then there's just 2 little pot rivets that you've got to drill out, and then the whole plate will come off. The new one will just locate, the pot rivets are just to locate it. You can use new pot rivets, but there's no real need. The stub axle will actually go through and locate the drum backing plate nicely onto its mating surface. But it is worth having a look. They are not cheap. I'm looking at the price of this Mark II one, and I can't believe it's £192. The last time I looked at a Mark 1 backing plate, it was about £90. They are not cheap, and I would only recommend buying them if you need to. But most owners can usually wire brush them, clean them up, bit of rust protection, rust converter, zinc primer, give it a stone chip, and then put everything back on, front and back, by the way. If you have to remove the drum backing plate to do this job, please do, because it will save you a lot of money by trying to refurbish an old one. And just make sure, if there are holes in it though, that's a problem, because then contaminants can get into the shoes and the drum assembly. It's just not good. So just think about it. So hopefully you won't have to spend this cost, but it's something you really have to be aware about. And the next thing, while we're talking about the back brakes, is the handbrake cable. Now, the one that is pictured is for drums, okay? That is a drum brake, parking brake cable. But the discs one that use rear discs, they're exactly the same. There is a few things that I might have to point out. People ask me all the time about converting to discs from drums. Don't bother, because you've got to buy the whole knuckle and whole hub. You're not going to see much difference, believe you me. And people say, oh, there is a difference. I'm sorry, the only people that do that are people that have modified their Mark 1s and have upped the power of those engines to something stupid, and they need the brakes to compensate for that. That for me is why keeping a Mark 1 standard is a no-brainer, because then you're having to mess around with other bits. There's no point doing engine modifications and then not doing brake ones. You have to. And a lot of people are quite sensible in that respect. It's actually a sensible choice. If you up the power and you've got to up the brakes, a lot of people don't do that, strangely enough. They do all their engine mods, but they forget the brakes that actually will save their life if, well, pretty much if you don't do it. But anyway, there's no point in doing it. Just keep it original. I really don't think it's an absolute faff to do it, and I just don't bother. It's not worth the results anyway. And then it's made even more complicated if you've got ABS. But this is a good kit. It's the cables are very similar to the originals. They come with all the bracketry to nail it down as such, clip it in, I should say. There's a little bracket with a little nut. It's actually a nut on these where the bracket goes by the sill. The originals from the factory are screwed in with a little screw that will round, so you'll have to cut the screw off to get the bracket off. You might have to get a Dremel in again to cut that off. A Dremel is an important tool in that respect, but this comes with an actual hex 7, something like that, and it will just screw straight into the bodywork. No problems about that whatsoever. It's like a self-tapping. But the actual handbrake is rubber gated, so there's like the outer sheath is rubber. Now the original handbrake cables are a metal sheath. What I've found with Mark 1s recently is quite a few of them have got seized handbrake cables, because unfortunately the cable is getting stuck or actually seizing. Because it's a metal piano wire style cable, as most cables are in cars these days, or have been anyway. That piano wire will actually seize to the inner side of the metal sheathing. That is usually on cars that are not used and are in their garage. So if you've got the original handbrake cable and you've left your Mark 1 on sawn over the winter, which a few people have, be very careful, because even if you've left the handbrake off or put it on, it will stick in that one position. So taking the handbrake off and giving it a good old pull up and down is a good idea, because it stops that problem. But it doesn't completely eliminate it, and you do eventually need to replace them. And this is an ideal exercise, because I fitted this to my own, no problems. It was fitted 4 or 5 years ago, no issues with this one, and this is my recommendation. The handbrake cables for the disc models are a bit different to these, but very similar, bracketry, that sort of thing. If you have a rear drum brake model, your handbrake cable will be the one that I've just shown in the pictures. But you will also have something that people don't change, and I think it's a bit of a false economy if you are changing things because you want a good solid handbrake, a good efficient handbrake, efficient shoes, adjusted properly, wheel cylinders and everything else, new drums, and then you forget this bit. Yes, it is the rear drum handbrake cables. They're tiny little sections. You can still get this on Ford. The parts number is 1343668, okay? They're £8 each. Buy both of them for both sides, okay? They will basically connect in that little metal sheath. You'll connect the back end of the handbrake cable that I've shown you in the last picture to that metal sheath. That will spline through the train arm and go back into the rear of the actual drum brake backing sheet, the backing plate, I should say, backing sheath, the backing plate. Okay, there's a little hole for that grommet to sort of sit in, and then the rest of that springy bit goes through into the actual parking brake mechanism, and then you've got the little cam at the end which slots into that handbrake lever onto the wall of the shoes, okay? And that piece does stretch. That will stretch just as much as the handbrake. And I've known people to actually change their handbrake, change the shoes, adjust it, and it's still slack because that part of the system is also stretched. You need to change these because it's something people just forget about all the time. So please do. They're £8. They're very available. They're cheap. Please don't forget to change them. And don't forget the rear brake hoses, okay? They are very long-lived. It was only 2 years ago that I actually replaced the rear brake hoses on my Mark 1, and they were the originals. They had Ford emblems on them. They were the originals. I changed them for Febby ones. Remember, make sure it's for a drum brake model or a disc brake model, because they're two different lengths and designs, okay? Make sure you've got that correct, okay? The calipers on Mark 1s are sometimes known for seizing at the rear, but again, all the calipers, discs, pads at the front, they're very obtainable, which is why I'm not going to even talk about that, because they're very freely available and very cheap. But what I will talk about are these. We've got the front brake hoses, which is pictured here. They will fit either side. Buy two of them. They're like £9 each. Second-hand, aftermarket, very cheap, very good, no issues. Usually on Mark 1s with the original brake hoses, when they get old, they corrode around the ferrules and then they start leaking. The compression fit around the ferrules fails and they start weeping a little bit. Not ideal. So change a couple of these. And the next thing I'm actually going to come to is actually these set of pipes. Now these pipes are, you can get them on eBay quite willy-nilly. If you haven't got the confidence to actually flare your own copper nickel brake pipes, then I would suggest you look at a few eBay sellers who pre-make these pipes. There's actually a good market for these pipes, and these are the front ones. Obviously the left hand one in the picture is the driver's side, and the right hand one is for the passenger side, and this set in particular is applicable for every model with ABS. If you haven't got ABS, that right hand brake pipe is not applicable. You can only use the left hand driver's one, because that basically at the top of the picture terminates at the ABS motor, which sits behind or underneath the fuse board behind the airbox, okay? But if you have non-ABS, you won't have a pump. You'll just have a straight ride all the way to the master cylinder. That is where I actually cut my pipe and actually flared a connection between the two of them and made my own. So I had to learn to make my own there. So if you have non-ABS, then you've got a bit of a problem there, because you have to, I can't actually find any sellers that have made that pipe. It's such a long length, it'll be difficult to actually get it delivered. So you would have to make your own if you have got no ABS, and that's quite a few Mark 1 owners. But these are freely available. No, there are no pipes to the rear brake pipes, because again, they're so long in length and they go over the tank. You got to have your own made. You got to find someone who's good at flaring, or have a go yourself. Flaring, it takes a few practices. Get the right tool. Don't get cheap flaring tools, and watch a few YouTube videos. It is simple. Maybe I'll be doing some of my own. In terms of everything else, I will point out the front brake pipes are all at an age now where they're starting to look a bit corroded. They are the most obvious ones to change because they're near the wheels. The rear ones also, especially the ones over the tank. Personally, I've had all my braking system done in copper, apart from the ones that go down the centre of the car. They rarely give issues, but just watch them where they go through the clips. If so, you'll have to get some pipes made, and you'll need a tool to straighten the pipes out. They never look as straight as OEM, but you can try and get one to straighten a pipe out and go from the front to the back. Bear in mind though, depending on how much of the system that you want to cut out, you will have to drop the front subframe, because the brake pipes are wedged between the subframe and the bodywork. They literally go through. There is no way you're going to be able to do it by that. So you're going to have to do it. They actually sit in the clips where they go through the subframe, between the subframe and the body, I should say. So you're going to have to drop the front subframe a little bit. Faff, I know, but eventually owners will probably have to do that. But I just want to finish with this picture. I have actually found this. That is a rear left or right rear brake hose for the disc brake models. The way I can tell this, actually, the top of the picture, there's actually a sticky out thread. That is, I think, what goes into the caliper. It screws into the caliper body, and then the bottom bit is where it actually connects, and you've got the little R clip that just goes through. Those R clips, you can get them cheap as chips. Usually you can reuse them, just clean them up and reuse and stick them back in, unless they're really bent, and you can still bend them back into shape as long as they go in and they literally clip into the hose itself. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm going to leave this here because there really isn't much to say about a Mark 1 ABS system. I mean, you have the ABS sensors, but they rarely give issues. They've had a couple of issues and you can still get them. The ABS Motors do not give issues as far as I'm aware. There are not really any signs that the ABS motors are getting to an age where they're failing or needing refurbishment. But I would recommend, if they do, send it off to ECU testing and they'll rebuild it for you. There's a lot of places that will do that now. They offer these refurbishing, basically refurbishing installations, I should say. They offer you these refurbishment programs where you can send your old item and they'll give you an exchange one and give you a brand new one, and they'll repair your old one and send it to another customer that sends their old one in. An exchange basis, basically. There's plenty of places that do that, but then there's plenty of second-hand ABS motors that work perfectly fine. So if you've got a dodgy one, or if you've confirmed that it's a dodgy one, get another second-hand one, because you might best bet be lucky enough to have one for many, many more years without that going wrong. So it's a case with ABS motors. They are an item of many valves and electrical gummings, and they can play up with age, but fingers crossed Mark 1s are not suffering from that. Apart from that, there's nothing really else. I mean, I could talk about the master cylinder, but again, I've only known a couple of failures of the master cylinder. They're very hardy items, and generally brake master cylinders from the factory will last about 25, 30 plus years until they actually start weeping through the seal. And you'll know about that because there'll be a few symptoms. The brake servos never go wrong. I've never known the brake servo to go wrong. Usually it's the vacuum hose with the non-return valve that causes an issue. But again, very rare items, and I've never really known an issue. So I'm not going to show you any of them parts because they're not a problem. Anyway, I'm going to leave this here. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I brought more of a brief episode on brakes. You take care, guys. I will see you in another parts episode.